Tywin Lannister had never felt such searing agony before, though he refused to let it show upon his stern features. He had survived countless trials, weathered betrayals, and subdued rebellions with calculated precision. Yet the pain in his belly was unlike any wound he had ever sustained in battle or negotiation. The bolt that Tyrion had fired into him struck true, aimed with a mixture of desperation, fury, and that sharpened intelligence Tywin had, in some corner of his mind, grown to resent. How could a man of such measured power have allowed his own son, a disgraced dwarf he had all but disowned, to stand over him with crossbow in hand, the lethal tension in the air thick with the stench of betrayal? The first bolt stole Tywin's breath, the second stole his composure. But though he collapsed onto the privy floor, drenched in his own blood, he refused to die. In the frantic moments that followed, as he gasped like a man drowning on dry land, the corridor erupted with screams and the clash of running footsteps. His loyal guard arrived, though belatedly, shouts of "the Hand," echoing through the walls of the Tower of the Hand. No maesters were immediately near, but desperate men carried Tywin, still breathing, through the halls in a whirlwind of panic and stumbling caution. In that twilight of consciousness, Tywin thought only of one thing. How had he failed so completely that Tyrion's hatred outmatched fear of punishment or flight? He had always believed Tyrion's cunning was worth more than his hideousness, worth more than any reason to discard the boy entirely. He had tried to keep him in line, threats, manipulations, even the forced marriage to Sansa Stark. But perhaps Tyrion's thirst for vengeance was stronger than Tywin had accounted for. Now, blood dripped from Tywin's abdomen, and his vision blurred as he heard frantic voices calling for a maester. While he drifted in and out, he forced himself to remain alive by sheer will. He repeated in his mind a silent vow. He would not perish here, not in ignominy, not in indignity. The will of House Lannister would continue to rest on his formidable shoulders. To die at this moment would grant Tyrion a victory that would not only shame him but unravel the precarious tapestry he had so meticulously stitched across Westeros. As they laid him upon a sturdy table in a private chamber, the maesters finally arrived with their potions, their stinking salves, their swiftly drawn needles and catgut. Tywin felt each prick and pull, and though the maesters told him that the milk of the poppy was the best cure for his pain, he refused to submit entirely to its dulling effect. He needed clarity. He needed to know who was in the room and what was being said. His eyes fluttered open, and he could make out the shape of Grand Maester Pycelle's withered face bending close. Cersei hovered in the corridor, aghast, her dark green eyes wide with terror and rage. Ser Kevan, his brother, was there as well, hovering near the foot of the table, silently watching everything with his perpetually calm gaze. Tywin tried to speak, but the words came out as a rasp. Aware that he might be delirious from blood loss, he clenched his jaw and willed himself to remain lucid. More attempts at speech ended in coughs. At last, his battered consciousness slipped beyond reason, though not before he heard Pycelle's voice. "The arrow was removed, but we must close his wounds. Quickly, hold him." Darkness enveloped him, but in that black void, Tywin Lannister refused to die. He harnessed the fierce pride that coursed through his veins, the pride that had sustained House Lannister through rebellions, Targaryen madness, and Baratheon uprisings. He would not let that pride fade, and as the world slipped away, he summoned a single resolve: to see Tyrion pay. A father's love was never something Tywin truly allowed himself to feel for the dwarf, but the father's wrath, that was something that flared in his chest with each ragged breath. And so he endured the surgery. He endured the humiliating convalescence, for the sake of power and vengeance, drawing on every ounce of resilience in his formidable being. When he finally opened his eyes days later, he was told that Tyrion had fled into the night with Varys's help. There had been no time to seal the city gates, and the eunuch, ever the opportunist, had vanished alongside the man accused of killing King Joffrey. It was rumored that Tyrion was somewhere across the narrow sea by now, perhaps in Pentos or Bravos, laughing at the father he had left for dead. Tywin seethed, but he concealed his fury behind stony silence as he forced himself to sit upright for the first time. A dull ache shot through his abdomen. The maesters had stitched him well enough, though the wound threatened infection. Tywin refused to let any sign of weakness show. Cersei attempted to greet him with tears, but the wave of paternal affection was not there. He stared at her as a commander might stare at a soldier who'd failed to defend an important gate. Jaime lingered in the corners, uncertain whether to approach or remain silent. All Tywin could think was that this fiasco had allowed Margaery Tyrell and her kin to eye the seat of power with renewed ambition. The Tyrells were not to be trusted. Without Tywin standing, lecturing, and strategizing, Cersei could have easily lost what little advantage the Lannisters had left. Days bled into weeks, and Tywin, determined to maintain the image of unbreakable authority, insisted on attending small council meetings in person, though he had to be carried in a litter or escorted by several guards. He would not languish in bed as conspiracies blossomed around him. Rumors were afoot that the Martells of Dorne contemplated joining with the Tyrells to exploit any weakness in King's Landing. Some said the North was stirring under the newly proclaimed king in the North. Others whispered that Stannis Baratheon had seized a foothold somewhere along the coastline, still clinging to his ragged claim to the Iron Throne. Tywin forced his returning strength to mask the throbbing pain beneath layers of dignified arrogance. He dressed in his usual crisp red and gold doublets, bearing the Lion of House Lannister with pride. When he entered the council chamber, though he walked slowly, none dared comment on his condition. As Grand Maester Pycelle droned on about the city's finances, Tywin's mind drifted to the next steps in his campaign for absolute dominance. He would need to quell any talk of weakness. Joffrey's death had shaken the realm, though Tommen was now king in name, perched uncertainly on the Iron Throne. Yet Tommen was but a boy. The real power, as always, lay in Tywin's hands, or so he intended to ensure. Each meeting ended with Tywin delivering terse instructions, commanding the lords to double their vigilance, to watch for any signs of trouble. Cersei followed him dutifully, but Tywin could see the resentment in her gaze. She had lost her son, and she blamed Tyrion, of course. But part of her anger, Tywin sensed, was directed at her father for not protecting Joffrey more thoroughly. Perhaps she felt that if Tywin had seen through Tyrion's cunning, the dwarven traitor would have been locked in a deeper, safer cell, too well guarded to break free. Tywin dismissed such blame. He had made a calculated gamble. Tyrion, despite his deformity, was cunning and valuable, until he wasn't. Kevan approached Tywin one evening as the hand sat by the warm glow of a candlelit desk in his private chamber, going through the ledgers of the realm's finances. Even recovering from a near-fatal wound, Tywin's sense of duty was unwavering. Kevan noted the lines of strain etched on his brother's face, but Tywin refused to acknowledge any suggestion of vulnerability. "Are you certain you should not rest?" Kevan asked. Tywin looked up, his stare as cold as a winter wind. "I will rest when the debts of House Lannister are collected and every threat to our power is extinguished." He paused to sip watered wine, wincing slightly at the motion. "And I mean every threat, brother, including the one that scurried off to Essos." Kevan nodded, well aware of the subtext. Tyrion had not been caught, though efforts continued to track him. Ravens had been sent to the free cities, offering generous bounties for the imp's head. Tywin wanted Tyrion alive, though, to face justice, or what Tywin deemed justice. Varys was trickier. The eunuch could be anywhere, but Tywin recognized that removing Tyrion's enabler was as crucial as removing Tyrion himself. At times, Tywin wondered if it had been an error to keep Varys so close in the first place. But the spymaster's information had proven invaluable before. Now, it seemed the spider had spun a final web to help Tyrion escape. Despite his injuries, Tywin found the flickering embers of a deeper plan forming. King's Landing needed stability, and that stability would not come from Tommen alone. Cersei's unpredictable nature, the Tyrell's ambition, and the simmering resentments among the lords demanded that Tywin produce a show of ironclad order. He quietly made arrangements to recall certain loyal bannermen to the capital. He intended to send messages to the Westerlands to muster new forces if necessary. Gold from the crown's treasury, even if it was in meager supply, could be used to hire additional sellswords, men whose loyalty could be bought more easily than that of the fractious lords. Every day that Tywin survived, the tension in the Red Keep thickened. Many believed he had died, for the rumor of his assassination attempt spread like wildfire through the streets of Flea Bottom. But once people saw him step out onto a balcony overlooking the yard, saw him staring down with cold, commanding eyes, they knew the Lion of Lannister had not fallen. Whispers began to swirl that Tywin Lannister was immortal, that he could not be killed by mere mortal means, not even by his own son's crossbow bolts. Such superstitious talk was precisely the aura Tywin wanted. A ruler who seemed invincible could quell unrest without drawing a sword. Rumors were powerful weapons, and Tywin had always known how to wield them. The day he made his first public appearance after his recovery, the courtyard below the Red Keep was filled with golden-armored Lannister guards. The air smelled of horse sweat, dust, and the faint tang of newly spilled wine. Tommen stood next to Margaery Tyrell, looking far too young to be a king, while Cersei lingered on the dais, her face like sculpted ice. The Tyrells, Mace, Olenna, and Loras, all wore polite expressions, but Tywin could see the curiosity in their eyes. They wanted to witness for themselves whether the fabled hand was truly strong enough to hold the realm together. With measured steps, Tywin descended into the courtyard. A hush fell over the onlookers. The gold lion sigil gleamed on his cloak, accentuated by the sunlight. Though he walked stiffly, no one dared speak of his lingering wound. He raised his voice, commanding that new measures be put in place to protect the realm's peace. He declared that all who threatened the crown, be they traitor or exile, would be shown no mercy. The Lannister guards banged their spears in approval. Cersei's face remained unreadable, but Olenna Tyrell nodded, though it was unclear whether she truly endorsed this or merely feigned compliance. In private, Tywin did not let his guard down. He knew the Tyrells would test him, possibly even try to outmaneuver him politically. He recalled with bitterness that Loras Tyrell had once declared he should have been named to the Kingsguard earlier. The arrogance of that boy, and the cunning of the grandmother, did little to ease Tywin's suspicions. But he needed the Tyrells for now, for the alliance that kept the Lannisters afloat in the eyes of the other great houses. They had the food, the resources. Tywin's own forces had been stretched thin by war, and the Iron Bank of Bravos was sniffing around for the crown's debts. The realm was a powder keg, so Tywin orchestrated lavish feasts and grand illusions of unity. At each banquet, he sat at the center, the wounded lion presiding over a facade of splendor. He raised cups of arbor gold to the health of King Tommen, all the while privately orchestrating campaigns to fortify the roads leading from Casterly Rock and the Westerlands to King's Landing. One night, while strolling slowly in the corridors, he still felt the pangs of his injuries. Tywin encountered Jaime near the entrance to the royal apartments. Jaime wore the white cloak of the Kingsguard, but Tywin, in that moment, could not help seeing the son who had once been his pride and shame. Jaime had lost his sword hand and some piece of himself along with it. The father and son exchanged a brief, tense silence. Finally, Tywin spoke in a measured tone. "You still have a duty to this house. We have lost too much face already." Jaime clenched his jaw, as though swallowing back a retort. Since losing his hand, Jaime's swagger had transformed into a quiet bitterness. Tywin studied him, recalling the golden-haired boy who had once been unstoppable with a sword. But there was no comfort to offer, not in Tywin's nature. Instead, he said, "Keep the king safe. I do not wish to repeat the fiasco that befell your nephew." Jaime nodded curtly. No affection was exchanged between them, only an exchange of one command and one dutiful acknowledgement. Tywin turned and limped away, cloak swishing against the floor. In the weeks that followed, Tywin's health slowly improved. His appetite returned, though he ate bland foods in measured portions. His mind, more active than ever, began to spin new plans for controlling the realm. He dispatched agents to the Riverlands to quell the embers of rebellion still glowing there. The Freys were losing their grip on the region after the Red Wedding's horrors. The Blackfish, Bryn Den Tully, was rumored to still be at large, rallying men to the Stark cause. Tywin had no illusions that these remnants could topple King's Landing alone, but he feared they could unite with the Bolton-fearing Northmen. The last thing Tywin needed was a consolidation of Stark loyalists and Baratheon supporters. So he decided to send a detachment of Lannister soldiers, under the command of several trusted bannermen, to the Riverlands. He wanted them to reinforce the frays and ensure that any spark of resistance was stamped out. Cersei questioned his decision, citing the expense and the risk of depleting King's Landing's defenses. Tywin silenced her with a glare. "You are not the hand of the king," he said coldly. "You remain mother to Tommen, and your counsel is valued, but do not pretend to rule. This must be done swiftly, or we will lose more gold and men in a protracted conflict." Cersei bit her tongue and did not pursue the argument further. Tywin saw the hate flicker in her eyes, but he also recognized that she feared him. That fear, he concluded, was a necessary tool to keep her impulsive nature in check. Meanwhile, the hunt for Tyrion remained fruitless. Raven after raven returned with no conclusive news. Tywin's informants in Pentos claimed there had been no sight of the Imp Bravos was a possibility. Tyrion might attempt to ally with the Iron Bank to retaliate against the Lannisters. But the Iron Bank, calculating and merciless, was unlikely to favor a single fugitive over the potential of the Crown's eventual repayment. Tywin was not entirely reassured by that logic, but he decided to focus his energies on the immediate threats within Westeros. Tyrion would show himself eventually. The dwarf could not resist stirring trouble, if only to spite his father. It was during a crisp morning, the sky painted pale blue, that Tywin arranged a discreet meeting with the new Master of Whisperers. This man, a minor lord from the Crownlands, had been plucked from relative obscurity but possessed a certain knack for gathering secrets. Tywin had gleaned from conversations that the new spymaster was eager to prove himself, to fill the void left by Varys's departure. Over a table of half-eaten bread and cheese, Tywin pressed the man for any rumors of disloyalty among the lords. The spymaster mentioned quiet talk that some lords in the Vale might be forging an alliance with Peter Baelish, who had taken little Robert Arryn under his wing. Tywin's lip curled at the name of Littlefinger. Another cunning fox, always shifting alliances. But the Vale was not the immediate concern. Baelish had no interest in open war yet. Tywin pressed the spymaster for more immediate concerns. The man coughed awkwardly and mentioned that there was some stir in the north, that wildlings might be pressing south now that the Night's Watch was compromised. Tywin waved a dismissive hand. "The wall is far," he said. "The wildlings are disorganized savages. Our concern is the lords who might conspire here, in this kingdom. Continue watching the Tyrells." The spymaster bowed and left. Tywin sat there, rotating a cup of tea in his hands, contemplating how precarious the situation truly was. He could sense that illusions of grandeur were not enough anymore. The wars had drained the coffers. The city was rife with orphans and hunger. The Tyrells provided food, but at a cost of increased influence over the crown. The common people whispered that the Lannisters were losing favor with the gods. Joffrey's demise, the Imp's escape, and Tywin's own near-fatal wound fed the gossip that the House of the Lion was cursed. Tywin, as much as he despised superstition, took note. Perception was reality to the masses, and if the small folk believed the Lannisters had lost the gods' favor, rebellion might breed in the shadows. Nevertheless, Tywin pressed on. He ordered more troops to stand guard at the main gates. He organized new shipments of grain from the Reach to ensure bread remained affordable in the city's markets. A hungry populace was a rebellious populace, and he had no intention of letting King's Landing slip out of his control as it had under Aerys Targaryen's madness or under the chaotic rule of his father, Tytos. Tywin would not see the city burn. Every move he made was designed to project unwavering authority. At one point, he even forced himself to personally preside over a trial for a minor lord accused of treason, ensuring the entire court witnessed how swiftly he dispensed justice. The man was found guilty after minimal deliberation, and Tywin sentenced him to die by the headsman's sword. The courtyard execution was swift, yet Tywin ensured that word of it spread throughout King's Landing. Treason against the Lannisters would not be tolerated. As the final echoes of the headsman's blade faded, Tywin thought of the day he had orchestrated the Red Weddings plan with Walder Frey. Ruthless efficiency had always been his hallmark. He did what had to be done for House Lannister, whether the realm considered it honorable or not. Yet a sliver of vexation gnawed at him. If his cunning was so flawless, why had Tyrion slipped his grasp and nearly killed him? Though he would never confess it aloud, Tywin recognized that his arrogance, that unwavering belief in his own mastery, had rendered him blind to the possibility that Tyrion might so directly confront him in his final moments before fleeing. That was a miscalculation Tywin would not repeat. The next crisis came from the Iron Bank. A representative arrived in King's Landing, an austere Braavosi dressed in dark finery, to discuss overdue payments. The Braavosi insisted upon speaking with the hand of the king directly, as the master of coin post had become little more than a seat for incompetent sycophants following Littlefinger's departure. Tywin, swallowing his pride, had the man escorted to his solar. Over a tense negotiation, Tywin conceded that the crown's debts were substantial. He offered partial payments and assured them that once stability was fully restored to the realm, commerce and trade would flourish again, making it feasible to repay the bank in full. The Braavosi, unimpressed, calmly reminded Tywin that the Iron Bank always collects, sooner or later. Tywin responded with a silent glare, letting the words hang in the air like a threat. Ultimately, they hammered out a temporary arrangement, though Tywin knew this was only a reprieve. The Braavosi's parting words echoed in the hallway. "We trust in your name, Lord Tywin, but trust can fade if coin does not appear." Such words would have unsettled a lesser man, but Tywin only added them to the growing list of things he needed to address. There was no time to falter. King Tommen, growing slightly older, needed to be educated in matters of state. Tywin forced maesters and septons to teach the boy, drilling him in the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, ensuring he could recite the lineage of noble houses. But Tommen's gentle nature was obvious. He lacked Joffrey's cruelty, which might have been a boon under different circumstances, yet it made him pliable to the influences around him. Margaery Tyrell, in her sweet way, had begun guiding the boy's decisions. Tywin kept watch, ensuring that Cersei did not lash out in paranoid jealousy. Controlling the mother was sometimes more challenging than guiding the Child King. Day after day, Tywin exerted his will, healing in the shadows, strengthening the realm's grip in broad daylight. As the months passed, rumors arrived that Tyrion had traveled as far south as Volantis. Stories swirled that he sought alliances with Sellswords, or perhaps tried to contact Daenerys Targaryen in Meereen. The possibility that Tyrion might join forces with the last Targaryen was a chilling thought, for Tywin knew that Daenerys commanded dragons. Even the might of the Lannister armies would be hard-pressed to stand against the rebirth of fire-breathing nightmares. Tywin instructed his spymaster to pay particular attention to ships departing from Westeros to Slaver's Bay. If Tyrion was indeed cunning enough to attempt to negotiate with Daenerys, Tywin would do everything in his power to sabotage that meeting. He had no illusions that the exiled queen would look favorably upon House Lannister. Not after the madness of Aerys and the sack of King's Landing. But Tyrion's wit combined with Daenerys' ambition could pose a dire threat if left unchecked. One bright day, Tywin stood on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. His hands rested on the stone balustrade, posture erect despite the ache that lingered beneath his ribs. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun. Ships bobbed at anchor, carrying goods to and from the city's bustling harbor. Tywin considered how close Stannis had come to breaching the walls during the Battle of the Blackwater. Only the cunning use of wildfire, and Tywin's timely arrival with the Tyrells, had saved King's Landing. Now, the city was calm by comparison, but Tywin recognized that calm as a thin veneer. The realm was still a battlefield, though the battles were fought with contracts, marriages, and whispered plots rather than open warfare. He turned to see Cersei behind him, her golden hair caught in a gentle breeze. They exchanged no pleasantries. Instead, she spoke in a clipped tone, informing him that the Martells had sent a letter. Prince Doran demanded justice for the death of Oberyn Martell. Cersei tossed the letter onto a nearby table, her lips twisted in annoyance. "They never cease their whining," she said, "as if we haven't done enough to placate them." Tywin lowered his gaze, scanning the Martell letter. Doran Martell wanted further assurances that Myrcella was safe in Dorne, that her position was protected. He also insinuated that the Lannisters had orchestrated Oberyn's fate unfairly. Tywin let the letter rest. "We will respond with diplomatic courtesy," he said, voice low. "Remind them of the alliance that would see Myrcella wed to Trystane. We will not stoke that fire unnecessarily." Cersei bristled, clearly worried about her daughter's well-being. But Tywin would not allow her to unravel the fragile peace with Dorne. He recognized that the Martells, if pushed too far, could become another thorn in the Lannisters' side. Thus, he adopted a carefully measured tone when drafting a response. He praised Prince Doran's wisdom, assured him that Myrcella's safety was paramount, and offered vague promises of restitution for Oberyn's death. Words, nothing more, but sometimes words were enough to stave off war. The next major complication arrived on a day that dawned with ominous clouds. A messenger from the Westerlands, riding hard day and night, brought news that a band of outlaws had attacked a Lannister caravan carrying gold intended for King's Landing. The caravan, escorted by only a handful of guards, was overrun, leaving the gold stolen and the guards slaughtered. Tywin read the report in stony silence. The messenger trembled before him, drenched from the rain that had begun to pour. Tywin demanded details, suspecting that these were not mere brigands but perhaps remnants of some rebellious faction. The messenger admitted that the outlaws were well organized, striking swiftly before vanishing into the hills. Tywin's fury was subdued yet lethal. He dispatched another force from the city, instructing them to coordinate with the local lords in the Westerlands. "Find these thieves," he commanded, "and make an example of them." He considered whether this was the work of the Brotherhood without banners or some remnant of the Stark loyalists. Whichever it was, they would learn the consequences of stealing from the lion. Such skirmishes became more frequent. Tywin, in the privacy of his solar, studied maps of Westeros, marking where reports of banditry or unrest had emerged. He noticed a pattern. Attacks were sporadic but always aimed at weakening House Lannister's resources. It took time, but eventually the new spymaster identified a group of mercenaries possibly linked to the Golden Company, one of the largest free companies across the sea. Tywin found that curious. Why would the Golden Company, historically associated with Targaryen sympathizers, now meddle in the Westerlands? His mind immediately jumped to rumors of Daenerys Targaryen's interest in reclaiming the throne. Could it be that some of her supporters had infiltrated Westeros, waging a covert campaign to sap the Lannisters' wealth? Tywin's anger flared, but he knew better than to lash out blindly. Instead, he began writing letters to lords who might be sympathetic. He was determined to lure out any traitors. The noose tightened, though it cost him dearly in gold and men. Amid these troubles, Tywin's personal health never fully returned to what it once was. At times, when alone, he clutched at his side, feeling a twinge of pain that reminded him how close he had come to death. He swallowed the bitterness of that memory, forging ahead. There was too much work to be done to indulge in self-pity. He used the memory of that privy floor and the shame of nearly dying there as fuel for his ambition. Each day he rose earlier than the sun, met with advisors, quashed rumors, planned alliances. The Lannister name was carved from centuries of supremacy, but recent events had chipped at its foundation. Tywin would not allow that foundation to crumble on his watch. As the year neared its end, another messenger arrived, disturbing news from the north. Reports indicated that Roose Bolton, the new warden of the north, faced increased unrest. The unrelenting winter had set in, and skirmishes with wildlings or rogue northern bannermen loyal to the fallen Starks were on the rise. Tywin saw a chance to weaken Bolton's position if he did not act quickly. Despite Bolton's complicity in the Red Wedding, Tywin understood that any significant unrest in the north might ripple southward, giving enemies of the crown an opening. If Bolton fell, who would take control? Some new Stark pretender? Or even Stannis Baratheon, rumored to have marched north? That possibility was even worse. Tywin had to be sure that the north remained in hands favorable to the Lannisters. He briefly considered dispatching reinforcements, but with the kingdom so stretched, every decision carried risk. Instead, he decided to send a measured number of experienced knights to assist in quelling any immediate rebellions, while insisting that Bolton prove himself worthy of being warden by handling his own troubles. Tywin's message was clear: stabilize the north, or we will find someone else who can. Amid these political machinations, Tywin's relationship with his family became even more strained. Cersei, vexed by the presence of Margaery, turned her frustrations on her father at times, accusing him of not caring enough about Joffrey's memory. Jaime remained distant, wrestling with his new identity as a one-handed knight. Pycelle's dithering counsel grated on Tywin's nerves, and Kevan alone offered some semblance of genuine loyalty without challenge. Yet Tywin's real frustrations lay beyond the family circle. He often thought of Tyrion, imagining the dwarf's mocking grin somewhere across the sea. The wound was not just physical. It was a blow to Tywin's pride that his own son had nearly killed him in such a humiliating manner. This personal vendetta blended with Tywin's overarching strategy for the realm. He quietly funded new efforts to infiltrate the free cities, to place watchers at every port, to listen for any whisper of Tyrion Lannister. Eventually, Tyrion would be found, and when that happened, Tywin intended to see him brought back in chains. One evening, as a howling wind swept through the Red Keep's parapets, Tywin sat by his fireplace, the flames dancing across his features in flickers of light and shadow. Kevan visited him, bearing letters from certain lords in the Westerlands who pledged renewed loyalty, should Tywin continue to protect their interests. Tywin read them, then cast them aside. "Fear is what keeps them loyal," he said to Kevan. "They see me as unkillable. A crossbow bolt in my gut was not enough to silence the lion's roar." His voice held no hint of humor or exaggeration. Kevan nodded, uncertain how to respond. Tywin inhaled deeply, exhaling with a grim look. "We must maintain that image," he continued. "Any sign of weakness, and they will pick at us like vultures." Kevan bowed his head in agreement. "You have always known what is best for our house." Tywin let his gaze linger on his brother. "You have served me well, Kevan, perhaps better than my own children." There was no softening in his tone, just a statement of fact. "But do not grow complacent. We have many battles yet to fight." In the days that followed, visitors from the Reach arrived, bearing lavish gifts and compliments, praising Tywin's steadfast leadership. Tywin greeted them with politeness, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. He recognized these gestures as attempts to win favor and further entrench Tyrell influence in the capital. Still, he needed the Reach's bounty, so he humored their flatteries. Margaery Tyrell continued her quiet campaign to endear herself to Tommen and the people of King's Landing. Her charitable acts, feeding the poor, visiting orphans, painted her as the realm's new beloved queen. Tywin observed all of this silently. Let her gain the love of the small folk. It served Lannister interests if the crown appeared compassionate. The real power remained behind the scenes, directed by Tywin's iron hand. If the Tyrells ever forgot that, Tywin would waste no time in reminding them. Gradually, a sense of uneasy stability settled over King's Landing. The presence of Lannister guards in the streets was a constant reminder that Tywin's watchful eyes and unforgiving wrath hovered nearby. Crime rates dropped, merchants dared to conduct business more freely, and visitors trickled into the city from across the realm, cautious but curious. The major lords, though wary, seemed resigned to Tywin's continuing hold on power. Even the Iron Bank quieted its demands, content with partial repayments and the prospect of future interest. Tywin kept the realm balanced on a razor's edge, aware that a single misstep, one defeat in the field, one scandal in the court, could topple everything. Yet he thrived on this tension, drawing strength from it, forging ahead to cement a Lannister legacy that would endure for generations. Eventually, word came from the Riverlands that a minor skirmish had ended with a resounding Lannister victory, capturing a handful of rebel leaders. Tywin had them brought to the city. He interrogated them personally, in a dark chamber beneath the Red Keep. Rumor claimed the men were battered and bloodied, though Tywin insisted on no unnecessary cruelty. Pain was not the point. Information was. He extracted enough to confirm that small groups across the land were being funded by unknown benefactors, possibly from Essos. Tywin felt the old anger stir again. All signs pointed to outside interference, perhaps from Targaryen loyalists. But confirmation was elusive. When he had the answers he needed, he ordered the men to be executed. Their heads were displayed on spikes by the city gates, a harsh reminder of what awaited traitors. That evening, as Tywin stood upon the walls and looked down at the grim spectacle, the flicker of torchlight danced across the severed heads. The memory of his near death at Tyrion's hands returned unbidden. For a moment, the old man closed his eyes, inhaling the night air. He imagined Tyrion's face on those spikes. It was a fleeting fancy, but it brought him a measure of satisfaction. It would not be enough, though, to merely kill Tyrion. The dwarf had insulted the Lannister name in the most personal way. Tywin wanted him to understand, before the end, that no one betrayed House Lannister without suffering the consequences. He opened his eyes and turned away. The future demanded his undivided attention. Sometime later, an unexpected visitor arrived at King's Landing. An emissary from Dorne, not the usual sly diplomat but a member of Prince Doran's personal retinue, carrying urgent tidings. Tywin, seated on the Iron Throne in Tommen's stead for the meeting, listened impassively as the emissary spoke of trouble in the Stepstones, affecting trade routes and threatening Dornish ships. Supposedly, pirates and sellswords harassed vessels bearing the Sun and Spear banners. Dorne, the emissary said, respectfully requested the Crown's support in clearing these rogues. Tywin tapped a finger on the steel arm of the throne. He understood the subtext. If the Crown failed to respond, Dorne might look elsewhere for alliances, perhaps forging ties with the Targaryen girl across the sea. Tywin could not allow that, so he agreed to dispatch royal ships to assist in securing the trade routes, demanding in return that Dorne abide by its vow of loyalty and keep Myrcella safe. The emissary bowed, a measured satisfaction in his eyes. Thus, Tywin had one more front to manage: the seas near the Stepstones. Within the castle walls, the whispers of courtiers and servants alike carried the same refrain. Tywin Lannister was unstoppable. Even a crossbow bolt to the gut had not removed him from the realm's helm. Fear and respect coalesced around his name, forging a protective shell. But behind that shell, Tywin grew weary, though he would never admit it. The weight of countless responsibilities pressed on him, and the lingering pain in his side was a constant reminder of his mortality. He slept little, ate sparingly, and maintained a ceaseless schedule of meetings, letters, and decrees. He refused to yield power to anyone, not even his most trusted allies. The realm was precariously balanced, and only his iron will held it together, or so he believed. When winter's chill spread more deeply across the land, word arrived that Stannis Baratheon had advanced through the north, forging an alliance with some of the wildlings. Tywin frowned at the reports. If Stannis truly united with the wildlings, the resulting force might be formidable enough to challenge Bolton's tenuous hold. And if Bolton fell, Tywin's hold on the north fell with him, leaving a vacuum that might draw the attention of every opportunist in the realm. Another war could erupt, draining more of the Lannisters' gold and blood. Tywin wrote stern instructions to Roose Bolton, demanding a full report, urging him to crush Stannis' forces before they could gain momentum. But Tywin knew that victory in the harsh climate of the north was uncertain. A new calculation formed in Tywin's mind. If Bolton proved too weak to handle Stannis, perhaps Tywin would do better to orchestrate a quiet arrangement with the northern houses directly. Yet forging new alliances there would be a delicate dance, given the Lannisters' responsibility for the downfall of House Stark. On a day when the wind howled through the city's alleyways, Tywin held an audience with key members of the small council. Mace Tyrell arrived in resplendent attire, prattling about the bounties of the Reach, while Pycelle nodded sleepily in a corner. Cersei stood behind Tywin's seat, her eyes scanning the room with simmering hostility. The Master of Whisperers entered last, bearing new tidings. A ship from Braavos had arrived in the harbor, carrying a merchant rumored to have news of Tyrion's whereabouts. Tywin ordered the man brought before him that very afternoon. He would have answers. When the merchant entered the throne room, he was trembling with excitement or fear. Before Tywin's cold gaze, he revealed that he had heard talk in Braavos of a dwarf matching Tyrion's description who had been spotted consorting with a red priestess, heading east. The merchant's stories were disjointed, full of hearsay, but the general direction was clear. Tyrion was believed to be traveling deeper into Essos, possibly toward Meereen. Tywin's jaw tightened. The possibility that Tyrion might truly seek to join Daenerys Targaryen was becoming more real. If that alliance came to fruition, it could spell disaster for the Lannisters. Tywin dismissed the merchant with a small purse of gold and a warning to breathe no word of this to anyone else. After the man scurried away, Tywin turned to the small council. "We must ensure our presence in Essos," he declared. "The Golden Company, Daenerys Targaryen, and any who wish to see the Lannisters fall, none must be permitted the advantage." It was decided that a trusted envoy would be dispatched overseas, armed with gold to buy alliances or sabotage the Targaryen cause. Tywin also considered the risk of entangling the realm in another expensive foreign venture. But the alternative, allowing Tyrion to forge alliances unfettered, was too dangerous to ignore. As the council session ended, Tywin returned to his chambers, lost in thought. He stared at a map of the eastern continent, his mind racing with possibilities. The cogs of war were turning again, only this time the battlefield was far from Westeros. Still, Tywin intended to control it. There was no corner of the known world where he would allow Tyrion to hide unchallenged. Late that night, he lay in his bed, half upright to ease the pangs in his side. The flicker of a single candle cast shadows on the stone walls. Tywin rarely allowed himself introspection, yet in the hush of midnight, a brief reflection washed over him. He had nearly died by his son's hand. He had lived, but the cost was a wound that refused to fully heal, physically and spiritually. House Lannister was held together by his will alone. Would it survive when he was gone? Perhaps that question drove him to push harder, to quash every threat. He remembered how his own father, Tytos, had been derided as weak, letting House Lannister fall into near disarray. Tywin had rebuilt the family's name through fear and gold. He would not see it undone now by a wayward son or a dragon queen across the sea. In the months that followed, Tywin's envoy set sail for Essos, clandestine deals were made, and the armies of the crown remained vigilant. King's Landing, under Tywin's iron-fisted stewardship, was as stable as one might hope in the aftermath of years of war. The king on the Iron Throne was a figurehead of sorts, but a kind-hearted one who the people did not resent. Cersei's rages were tempered by her father's unyielding presence. The Tyrells maintained the facade of alliance, reaping what rewards they could. The Martells of Dorne grumbled but remained within the bounds of civility. For now, even the North, though restless, refrained from open rebellion, its energy divided between internal strife and the pressing cold. Winter deepened, and yet Tywin pressed on, seldom leaving the castle, delegating tasks to captains and stewards, orchestrating a realm that was both too large and too fractious to be entirely controlled. But he knew how to compartmentalize threats, how to buy time with gold, how to play the lords against each other if it served the crown. He received updates on Tyrion's rumored movements overseas, but nothing concrete. The dwarf was elusive, weaving through free cities and stirring curiosity, if the rumors were to be believed. Tywin suspected a confrontation was coming, though he could not say when or where. All he knew was that he would be ready, no matter how far Tyrion traveled or what alliances he secured. House Lannister had endured for centuries, and Tywin was convinced it would endure for centuries more, shaped by his unrelenting hand. With the city streets quieter at night, Tywin sometimes walked the ramparts alone, accompanied only by a guard or two who knew better than to speak. The wind tugged at his cloak. He gazed out over the moonlit sprawl of King's Landing, from the stately towers to the slums of Flea Bottom. He considered each district in turn, where the gold was minted, where the guilds thrived, where orphans roamed hungry. It was a behemoth of human need and ambition, and he ruled it through fear, wealth, and a measure of grudging respect. Once, he had dreamed of a Westeros so firmly under Lannister dominion that no one would dare challenge them. Yet that dream had proven elusive. Even with the throne under his family's control, the realm seethed with potential revolt. On one of those night walks, he passed the door to the Tower of the Hand. The memory of being carried out, bleeding, nearly dying on the floor of the privy, surged through him. A lesser man might have felt shame or fear. Tywin felt only renewed purpose. He had returned from the brink unbowed, and would cement his family's claim on the realm at any cost. The Iron Throne was not merely a symbol of power. It was a reflection of Tywin's will, more so than that of any king who sat upon it. Thus, Tywin Lannister survived Tyrion's betrayal and consolidated power once more. The realm, for all its churning undercurrents of discontent, obeyed the stern command of the Hand who refused to be undone by poison, steel, or crossbow bolts. He had sacrificed much, his warmth, his affection, perhaps even his legacy of genuine love from his children, on the altar of power and duty. Yet he believed, with unwavering conviction, that it was necessary. If House Lannister was to reign supreme, then compassion and leniency could only be tools of strategy, never of weakness. And though the specter of his son's final vengeance might linger in the darkness, Tywin stood unflinching, a wounded lion still capable of a deadly roar. He believed in the gold, the fear, and the name he had etched into the annals of Westerosi history. And until his last breath, he would defend that name against all challengers, no matter how far they roamed or what flames they brought to bear.